Welcome back to the Becoming Mind Strong podcast. And we're doing a 3-part series on why macros didn't work for you. If you're someone who tried macros before, maybe you hated it because it was too tedious, maybe you stuck with it and it didn't work. There are 3 very definitive reasons why that happens. And most importantly, it is fixable. And the reason I'm so big on, I harp on this a lot is because I always say I was a teacher for over 10 years. I know differentiated learning is real. So if I knew 10 approaches to nutrition that worked, I would absolutely teach 10 and say, here you go, pick which one works for you. But macros are literally the single most sustainable approach to nutrition, in my not so humble opinion, because there is no restriction. They flow with human psychology. And best of all, they're human biology 101. When your plan is set correctly and you have someone who can teach it to you in a way where it's not meticulous and all consuming, it will work 1,000% of the time. It's human biology 101. So in the last episode, we talked about why online macro calculators and why generic formulas don't work. In the second of 3 parts, what we're going to dive into is why one and done numbers are never going to see you to and through. Check it out. So in the last episode, I told you, a lot of times when people come to me and they're working with a macro coach, my intention is not to throw the macro coach under the bus, but if you're going to spend cash, let's make sure you're getting results, right? So I'll tell them, do me a favor, ask your coach, how did they get your macro numbers? And what you're either going to hear if they're willing to tell you they used an online macro calculator, there's very few willing to admit that. What most of them will say is, oh, well, there's a very specific formula that I use to set these numbers. And what they're basically saying is, yeah, maybe they did it by hand, or they just plugged it into a calculator. Either way, it is not going to work. Now, in the third part of this series, we're going to talk about the clear indicator. Like, you don't even have to actually ask your coach that, because I'm going to give you the clear indicator that that's what they're doing. But for the purposes today, the second reason that online macro calculators don't work for a lot of, or online macro calculators, formulas, macros in general haven't worked for people, is because the numbers that they are being given, they're trying to do it one and done, right? So your macro coach hands you some numbers, or you don't listen to the first part of this podcast and you go use an online macro calculator. It pumps out some generic numbers that are wrong anyway. But now you're going to go and you're going to try to follow that plan. Okay. So let's say you got lucky. Let's say that you found a calculator that it's not right, but it's not terrible, right? I told you in the last episode, the 3 that I used. Let's say I went with the middle one. It had me at 1450. I'm going to be hangry all the time. It's not good for my metabolism. It's a terrible idea, but I'm not going to be in the hospital. I'm not going to be gaining weight. So maybe we call that a win. We're setting the bar real low. Okay. Here's what's going to happen. At 1450, first, again, I'm going to repeat, I'm going to shoot my metabolism in the foot because that's way too low for my body and how I train. But nonetheless, I'm going to lose weight for the first few weeks. Oh, this is magic. The weight is shedding off. My clothes are feeling differently. What is inevitably going to happen at some point is I am going to hit a plateau. And that's a beautiful thing. If you missed the episode about plateaus, go back and listen to it. Plateaus are our body's way of saying, this is just who I am and what I do now, right? They're their body's way of saying, I got this. We've locked it in. We've dialed it in. But nobody wants to be stuck in a plateau. They suck. So our job becomes to flick our body in the butt a little bit and say, proud of you. You're doing a great job. And we are not done. And in order to do that, our macros have to be tweaked and adjusted as we go, right? Because think about it logically. Even if that BS online calculator is being based off your age, your height, your weight, your activity level, those things are changing. Your weight is changing as you're doing this. Your activity level is probably changing. Even if it isn't, let's just focus on your weight. Things are shifting and your body is getting used to this new method. So if you've been handed one and done numbers that aren't being tweaked and adjusted as you go, there is no world in which staying consistent in those numbers over and over and over and over again when you're in a plateau are going to work. Now, there are going to be a week or two where you're going to notice everything stopped. Little plateaus are normal and we don't jump to fixing numbers. But if it has been weeks and weeks and months and you are in a plateau, goes back to my favorite expression, do what you've always done, you get what you've always gotten. It is not going to work. Macros are not designed to be one and done. There are very specific cues we have to be looking for in your body. I'm going to talk about them more in the next part of this series. There are specific cues we have to be looking for in your body to know when it's time to tweak and adjust your macro plan. And if you are not doing that, number one, you're running the risk of whatever BS formula calculator you use being wildly wrong, right? I told you the example of mine, I would have gained weight. And number two, even if I'm not going to call it strike gold, like you strike mud and it's like, all right, I can get away with this one. Even if you find one you can get away with, putting aside the fact you're probably shooting your metabolism in the foot, it's only going to work for a tiny period of time. And then you're going to hit a plateau. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to quit and you're going to say, oh, macros don't work. Macros are human biology. They absolutely work when, and this is the holy grail when they are done correctly. And being done correctly means they are personalized to you and they are tweaked and adjusted as we go. In the next part of this series, we're going to talk about exactly what that looks like. I'm going to talk about those tweaking and adjustings. I'm going to talk about the personalization. But in the spirit of keeping these short and sweet, number one, do not use an online macro calculator. Do not use a generic formula. If you're working with a macro coach and it's not really working for you, find out where they got their numbers or listen to the next part of the series. I'm going to pull the curtain back. You'll know where they got their numbers. And number two, if they're not tweaking and adjusting your numbers, if they've handed you some and they haven't changed in all the weeks, all the months you've been working for them, glaring red neon warning sign that something is wrong. In the next part, I'm going to walk you through exactly what it looks like to do macros correctly. I'll see you there.